Welcome back to the Paranormal State, Washington, and UFO UAP. With Makāula Nakae, a lifelong experiencer and ET contactee since 1990. Today's episode, 1968, Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods. One of the most celebrated and polarizing figures in ufology and ancient astronaut theory, Erich von Däniken left a massive legacy that continues to resonate across global pop culture. With his passing, the alternative history community lost one of its most recognizable television commentators and a founding pillar of modern paleo-contact lore. Published in 1968, originally in German as Erinnerungen an die Zukunft, or Memories of the Future, von Däniken's blockbuster book Chariots of the Gods stands as one of the most culturally disruptive and commercially successful publishing events of the 20th century. It single-handedly blasted the ancient astronaut theory out of dusty academic corners and straight into the mainstream global consciousness, transforming fringe archaeological speculation into a multi-million copy pop culture juggernaut. An in-depth examination of the book reveals its core arguments, its revolutionary impact, and its enduring legacy on modern alternative history and ufology. It is one of the wildest trivia facts in pop culture history. The cultural juggernaut spawned by Erich von Däniken actually made it all the way to the Academy Awards. When the book was adapted into a West German documentary film in 1970, released under its original German title, Erinnerungen an die Zukunft, or Memories of the Future, it pulled off a feat that still shocks film historians today. It received an official Academy Award nomination for Best Documentary Feature at the 43rd Oscars. While it didn't take home the actual golden statuary, losing out to Woodstock, scoring an Oscar nod gave the Ancient Astronaut Hypothesis a massive layer of unexpected mainstream cinematic credibility. It proved that whether traditional academics and scientists wanted to roll their eyes at the theories or not, Hollywood was more than happy to put ancient aliens on the red carpet. At the structural core of Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods lies a radical intellectual provocation, the systematic dismantling of academic orthodoxy regarding human history. Mainstream historical, anthropological, and archaeological frameworks have long relied on a linear, progressive model of development. This conventional narrative teaches that humanity began in a state of absolute savagery or Stone Age simplicity, slowly clawing its way upward through trial and error over millennia, inventing agriculture, discovering metallurgy, and finally stumbling into industrialization and modern science. Von Däniken argued that this linear model is not only arrogant and chronologically flawed, but physically incapable of explaining the actual physical evidence left behind by antiquity. He split his critique into two foundational pillars: the dismantling of modern academic condescension and the introduction of the extraterrestrial catalyst. The cornerstone of von Däniken's polemic was his fierce critique of how mainstream historians view ancient human capability, a bias he termed the ignorance assumption. Von Däniken pointed out that whenever mainstream archaeology encounters a monument, artifact, or map that defies easy explanation using simple tools, academia automatically defaults to a patronizing explanation. Primitive people must have spent centuries rubbing stones together, utilizing thousands of anonymous slave laborers, or executing accidental flukes of design. He systematically highlighted structural marvels, such as the precise interlocking stonework of Sacsayhuamán in Peru, where multi-ton megaliths fit together so tightly that a razor blade cannot slip between them, or the perfectly aligned air shafts of the Great Pyramid. Von Däniken argued that mainstream assertions that these feats were accomplished using copper chisels, hemp ropes, and brute human muscle were mathematically and logistically absurd. Paradoxically, von Däniken argued that mainstream science actually insults ancient intelligence far more than ancient astronaut theorists do. While skeptics accuse ancient astronaut theorists of robbing humans of their achievements, von Däniken countered that academia robs antiquity of its true genius by refusing to admit that ancient humans were sophisticated enough to interact with, record, and comprehend advanced, star-faring visitors. Having dismantled the gradualist view of history, von Däniken inverted the entire paradigm. He proposed that human civilization did not pull itself up by its bootstraps. Rather, it was jump-started by an extraterrestrial catalyst. Tens of thousands of years ago, advanced extraterrestrial travelers arrived on Earth. Finding a primitive hominid population such as Neanderthals or early Homo sapiens, these visitors intervened. Going beyond mere cultural teaching, von Däniken suggested that these celestial visitors engaged in directed genetic mutation or hybridization. By splicing their own genetic code with that of early hominids, they accelerated human evolution, abruptly bootstrapping a primitive ape man into a self-aware, intelligent creator capable of abstract thought, mathematics, and art. This explains, in his view, the mysterious missing link in human anthropology, the sudden explosive emergence of modern human consciousness and culture during the Upper Paleolithic Revolution. Ancient mythologies, religious texts, and oral traditions across the globe describe beings descending from the heavens in clouds of fire, speaking with terrifying voices, wielding weapons of light, and demanding obedience. Mainstream science dismisses these as primitive superstitions, animism, or meteorological metaphors. Von Däniken argued the exact opposite. The gods of ancient history were flesh and blood extraterrestrial astronauts. To explain how ancient humans reacted to these visitors, von Däniken utilized the anthropological concept of cargo cults observed in South Pacific Islanders during World War II, who built wooden replicas of airplanes and runways to summon the return of technologically advanced soldiers who had dropped supplies from the sky. Ancient humans, witnessing nuclear-capable spacecraft, anti-gravity propulsion, and laser technology, understandably misinterpreted ordinary space travelers as omnipotent deities, recording their technology as magic and their visits as divine intervention. By reframing human history around this extraterrestrial catalyst, Chariots of the Gods fundamentally altered how millions viewed humanity's place in the cosmos. We were no longer viewed as accidental primates stranded on a lonely rock, but as the deliberate biological and intellectual project of a galactic civilization, leaving behind a trail of monumental architecture and sacred texts that are waiting to be properly decoded now that our own technology has finally caught up to the reality of the stars. Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods relied heavily on physical, tangible anomalies. Rather than leaning purely on theological debate or abstract philosophical musings, von Däniken compiled a catalog of objects, structures, and geographic scars that baffled orthodox science. He classified these anomalies into two distinct categories: out-of-place artifacts, OOPArts, hinting at forgotten technologies, and monumental architecture defying primitive engineering limits. The term OOPArt describes items found in geographic or chronological contexts that should render them impossible according to standard historical timelines. Von Däniken used these artifacts to argue that advanced sciences had been gifted to antiquity. The Piri Reis map, 1513. Compiled by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, this historic map famously depicts portions of the western coast of Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and most controversially, the northern coast of Antarctica. Von Däniken highlighted that the map appeared to show Queen Maud Land's coastline free of ice, complete with detailed topographical riverbeds and mountain ranges hidden beneath thousands of feet of ice sheets. Because mainstream science dates the complete glaciation of Antarctica to millions of years ago, or at least long before human civilization, von Däniken argued the map could not have been drawn by 16th century sailors. Instead, he proposed that Piri Reis had stitched together ancient source maps, originally compiled from aerial reconnaissance flights, conducted by ancient extraterrestrial visitors who surveyed the Earth when its polar caps were clear. The Baghdad Battery, discovered in modern-day Iraq and dating back to the Parthian or Sassanid periods, roughly 250 BCE to 226 CE, these clay jars contained copper cylinders encasing iron rods and asphalt seals. When filled with an acidic liquid like vinegar or grape juice, these vessels generate a weak electrical current. While mainstream archaeologists have debated whether these objects were used for electroplating precious metals, storing sacred scrolls, or simple ritual purposes, von Däniken pointed to them as physical proof of lost electrical technology. He argued they represented downstream, degraded echoes of advanced electrical applications, originally introduced to early Mesopotamian civilizations by sky gods. When evaluating the colossal engineering feats of the ancient world, von Däniken refused to accept the brute force explanations favored by traditional academia. Mainstream history explains megalithic construction, through massive expenditures of manual labor, earthen ramps, wooden sledges, and copper tools. Von Däniken argued this explanation collapsed under basic mathematical and logistical scrutiny. At Giza, moving blocks weighing up to 80 tons with primitive ropes and copper chisels across tight spaces defies practical engineering limits. On Easter Island, transporting hundreds of towering stone moai statues, weighing many tons across volcanic terrain, without destroying them, required mechanisms far beyond primitive Stone Age capabilities. To bridge this gap, von Däniken proposed that ancient builders utilized anti-gravity devices, acoustic levitation, sound frequencies capable of altering mass, or heavy-duty extraterrestrial lifting equipment supplied by their cosmic visitors. Etched into the hyper-arid Peruvian desert, the Nazca Plateau features kilometers of colossal geometric lines, trapezoids, and intricate animal geoglyphs such as spiders, hummingbirds, and monkeys, drawn on such a massive scale that their true shapes are only discernible from high altitudes. Mainstream archaeologists generally interpret these lines as ritual processional paths, astronomical calendars, or water cult shrines created for local deities looking down from the heavens. Von Däniken inverted this interpretation entirely, arguing that the geometric perfection of the straight lines and the plateau's layout strongly suggested landing strips, navigational markers, or spaceports designed for extraterrestrial spacecraft descending to the surface. Through these physical anomalies, von Däniken constructed a compelling material argument. He suggested that human history is littered with physical remnants of a high-tech past that we are too conditioned to recognize. By treating these artifacts and structures not as primitive anomalies, but as the discarded hardware and infrastructure of flesh and blood space travelers, chariots of the gods, forced a generation to look at ancient history through the lens of applied technology rather than mere superstition. Von Däniken famously reread the biblical prophet Ezekiel's mystical vision of wheels within wheels and glowing roaring chariots, not as a divine metaphor, but as an eyewitness account of an extraterrestrial spacecraft landing, complete with thrusters, metal struts, and atmospheric distortion. He drew parallels across disparate cultures, Sumerian, Hindu, Mayan, Egyptian, arguing that myths of flying chariots, vimanas, gods descending from the heavens in clouds of fire, and miraculous virgin births were actually folk memories of genetic manipulation and technological contact with space travelers. The explosive success of Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods was not merely a publishing anomaly, it was a profound cultural moment driven by historical timing, psychological readiness, and the dawn of a new technological epoch. When the book hit shelves in 1968, it struck a nerve with a global public standing on the threshold of space exploration, creating a massive societal shockwave that continues to ripple through modern culture. The late 1960s represented a unique historical crucible. Humanity was locked in the geopolitical tensions of the Cold War, hovering on the brink of nuclear annihilation, while simultaneously watching the Apollo space program prepared to land humans on the moon. Before 1968, humanity explained historical anomalies, ancient mythologies, and religious miracles through the lens of localized folklore, lost continents like Atlantis, or supernatural divine intervention. Von Däniken provided a radically modern technological vocabulary for the mysterious past. Instead of angels, demons, or primitive superstitions, he translated antiquity into the language of astronauts, countdowns, launch pads, genetic engineering, and spacecraft. It made ancient history feel immediate, scientific, and relevant to a spacefaring generation. The book's commercial reception was unprecedented for a work of alternative history. It sold tens of millions of copies globally, was translated into dozens of languages, and spawned a massive empire of sequels. Crucially, it inspired the 1970 documentary film adaptation, which earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Documentary Feature, thrusting fringe theories directly onto the mainstream cinematic stage. The book laid the direct intellectual blueprint for decades of subsequent media, serving as the foundational DNA for modern franchises like the television series Ancient Aliens. Unsurprisingly, the mainstream scientific, archaeological, and historical communities launched a fierce, unrelenting counteroffensive against von Däniken's claims upon the book's release. Scholars dismissed Chariots of the Gods as pseudoscience, sloppy scholarship, and fabrications masquerading as fact. Critics pointed out numerous factual errors, misinterpretations of archaeological data, and chronological leaps. Furthermore, anthropologists raised a serious ethical critique. They argued that the ancient astronaut hypothesis promoted a form of racist history because it systematically robbed indigenous non-Western cultures such as the Incas, Egyptians, and Polynesians of their own native genius, ingenuity, and architectural mastery, attributing their monumental achievements instead to superior white or alien gods. Despite heavy academic condemnation and institutional rejection, the cultural footprint of Chariots of the Gods proved indestructible. It permanently welded ancient history to modern ufology, forging a sprawling alternative mythos. In this worldview, the gods of antiquity and the unidentified flying objects of the 20th century are fundamentally the same phenomenon: space travelers returning across millennia to monitor, evaluate, or reclaim the genetic and technological experiment they initiated at the dawn of human civilization. The relationship between Erich von Däniken and modern ufology is foundational. While ufologists traditionally focused on contemporary sightings, close encounters, and government secrecy, von Däniken expanded the horizon of ufology backward into deep time, arguing that modern UFOs are simply the continuation of an ancient visitation that has lasted for millennia. Before von Däniken published Chariots of the Gods, in 1968, modern ufology and ancient history operated in completely separate spheres. Ufologists studied saucers, radar traces, and military files, while historians studied stone tools, dynasties, and religious texts. Von Däniken aggressively welded the two fields together. He argued that the unidentified flying objects witnessed by pilots and civilians in the 20th century are the exact same craft piloted by the gods of antiquity. By reinterpreting religious texts such as Ezekiel's vision of wheels within wheels or Hindu descriptions of flying vimanas as eyewitness accounts of extraterrestrial spacecraft, he provided ufology with a massive historical pedigree, framing modern UFO sightings not as a brand new anomaly, but as a long-term planetary surveillance program. Von Däniken introduced a psychological framework that modern ufologists frequently use to explain why human beings react the way they do to anomalous craft. Drawing on anthropological studies of isolated tribes during World War II who built wooden replicas of airplanes to summon cargo-dropping soldiers, von Däniken argued that ancient humans reacted to star travelers through the lens of a cargo cult. When advanced intelligences manifested in the skies thousands of years ago, primitive humans lacked the technological vocabulary to understand physics, propulsion, or space travel. Consequently, the recorded spaceships as chariots of fire, suits as divine armor, and lasers as the wrath of the gods. Ufologists adopted this model to explain why modern sightings often retain elements of awe, mystery, and misinterpretation. In the broader ecosystem of ufology, debates have long raged over whether UFOs are physical machines from other star systems, the extraterrestrial hypothesis, are native interdimensional projections. Von Däniken firmly planted his flag in the nuts and bolts extraterrestrial camp, arguing that physical flesh and blood travelers traverse the cosmic gulf in high-tech spacecraft to jumpstart human civilization. His work paved the way for decades of subsequent ufological research, dedicated to hunting for physical, architectural, and genetic footprints left behind by these interstellar visitors. Von Däniken became a permanent fixture of the global UFO conference circuit, keynote speaker, and intellectual godfather to modern alternative media. Shows like Ancient Aliens do not exist without the groundwork he laid. He transformed ufology from an isolated fringe hobby into a sprawling global exploration of human origins, ensuring that whenever people look up at a modern UFO in the night sky, they immediately ask the oldest question in his playbook: have they come back to check on us? When Erich von Däniken's Chariots of the Gods hit bookshelves in 1968, nobody expected a former Swiss hotel manager to permanently alter how humanity looks at its own history. Yet, that single breathless volume, filled with enthusiastic question marks, wild archaeological leaps, and absolute conviction, ignited a global wildfire. By the time of his passing in early 2026, at the age of 90, von Däniken had transitioned from a fringe provocateur into an absolute cultural institution. But tracing his journey from the late 1960s through the decades reveals a fascinating evolution. How a lone heretic with a typewriter helped shepherd the entire narrative of ufology, from pulp magazine saucers into the multi-platform juggernaut of Ancient Aliens. When Chariots of the Gods was published right on the cusp of humanity's landing on the moon, the world was ripe for a paradigm shift. Traditional religion was losing its grip on a rapidly modernizing space-age society, and mainstream archaeology felt dry, dusty, and unimaginative. Von Däniken capitalized on that exact cultural vertigo. He looked at the pyramids of Egypt, the Nazca Lines of Peru, and the Moai of Easter Island, and asked a deliberately provocative question. What if we weren't alone, and our ancestors had a little extraterrestrial engineering help? Academia rolled its eyes, famously labeling his work as pseudoarchaeology and pseudoscience. Mainstream scientists like Carl Sagan lined up to critique his logic. But the public didn't care about peer reviews. Selling tens of millions of copies worldwide, the book tapped into a deep, rebellious human hunger. The desire to believe that our history is grander, stranger, and far more cosmic than our history textbooks dared to admit. During the 1970s, 80s, and 90s, von Däniken didn't just rest on his laurels. He went into overdrive. He churned out dozens of follow-up books, such as Gods from Outer Space and The Gold of the Gods, expanding his paleo contact hypothesis across every continent. Sure, some of his early sensational claims faced harsh corrections, including public admissions that certain adventurous expedition chapters were more dramaturgical effect than strict field journalism. But his resilience was staggering. He founded the AASRA, Archaeology, Astronautics, and SETI Research Association, and even built Mystery Park, later Jungfrau Park, in Interlaken, Switzerland, trying to give physical, brick-and-mortar architecture to his wildest theories. He became a traveling roadshow of the anomalous, lecturing globally with a slide projector and unshakable showmanship. By the time the 21st century rolled around, von Däniken's foundational framework had thoroughly soaked into the groundwater of global pop culture. But the real modern rebirth of his legacy arrived in 2009 with the premiere of the History Channel's Ancient Aliens. Suddenly, the man who had been mocked as a lone eccentric in the late 60s was transformed into the undisputed, meme-worthy godfather of a television empire. With his wild white hair, impassioned hand gestures, and fierce declarations that I'm not saying it was aliens, but it was aliens, von Däniken achieved absolute celebrity status. The narrative of ufology had evolved dramatically around him. While early 1950s ufology was obsessed with metal nuts and bolt saucers, buzzing Cold War skies, and later decades shifted toward abductions and government cover-ups, von Däniken's Ancient Astronaut Theory provided the deep historical roots. He connected the dots between modern UAPs and ancient scripture, framing gods, angels, and fiery chariots as misunderstood extraterrestrial visitors. Erich von Däniken didn't leave behind a proven scientific blueprint. He left behind something far more powerful, an enduring, imaginative sandbox. He took the rigid and yielding corridors of history and blew wide holes in them, reminding generations of readers that it is okay to look up at the ancient stone monuments of our ancestors and wonder if the stars had a hand in shaping us. In the end, his journey from a controversial 1960s paper mill to global television icon proved that if you tell a wild enough story with absolute unwavering conviction, the world will eventually turn around. Lean in close and listen. To be continued. Watch and listen. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full podcast now. Explore the archived Cosmic Awakening Volume 1, 1991, Peru, Journey into the Unknown. Sacred Valley of the Incas. Volume 2, Ascension 2012, The Golden Alchemy. Part 3, The First Contact and the Paranormal State. Join the journey. New episodes drop periodically. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 10 to 30-minute exploration into the evolution of ufology, perfect for your daily plunge into decoding hidden messages from outer space, designed to raise awareness and foster human evolution. Subscribe to support your inner development. Thumbs up to help push our channel through the algorithm. Comment below.